For 24 years, I solved complex systems engineering problems for a living. I debugged code that ran global logistics networks and optimized infrastructure that served millions of users. The problems were intricate, demanding, and I loved the intellectual rigor of solving them. But I can tell you without a doubt that the single hardest problem I ever had to solve in my entire life was what to do with a Tuesday morning after I left my job at 54. Everyone tells you to worry about the money, to focus on the numbers. No one ever told me that the greatest challenge wouldn't be funding my freedom, but surviving it. The real problem wasn't the financial runway. It was what to do with your life once the plane had landed and powered down on the tarmac. If you're anything like I was, your life runs on a master spreadsheet. You have a tab for your net worth, updated monthly. You have a projection for your withdrawal rate, modeled against 3 different market scenarios. You have a detailed project plan for your own obsolescence. It's a fortress of data you've built, brick by brick, to secure your future. But if you're being truly honest with yourself, probably late at night when the house is quiet, there's a persistent voice in the back of your head that keeps asking what happens when you run out of cells to fill. You have meticulously planned for how you will afford to leave your job. But have you spent a single afternoon planning for who you will be after you've left? I know I hadn't. I thought the answer would just show up. It doesn't. I didn't just have a plan. I had executed it to perfection. I ran the numbers for decades, a constant background process in my mind. I hit my $1.7 million target, a number that felt less like wealth and more like the successful output of a long-running script. I had optimized my tax loss harvesting and laddered my conversions. I pulled the trigger at 54, walking out of the office on a Friday afternoon feeling like I had solved the ultimate equation. I had solved the money problem, which I believed meant I had solved the retirement problem. That was a significant oversight. I had built a flawless financial engine, but had forgotten to design the vehicle it was supposed to power. The math was solid, but the human factors engineering was a complete and total failure. It took me nearly a year of disorientation to understand the system I needed to debug wasn't my portfolio. It was my own identity, running on legacy code from a job that no longer existed. So in this video, I'm not offering platitudes about finding your passion. I'm offering an engineering diagnosis, a 9-point deconstruction of the invisible psychological infrastructure your career provides, the parts you don't realize you're depending on until they vanish. We'll inventory the phantom calendar, the psychological paycheck, and the tyranny of unstructured time, treating your transition like the critical system it is. If you're building a financial fortress and want to make sure you're also building a life to live in it, stick around. Consider this your official invitation to the project. Hit subscribe and let's get to work. The first system failure occurred at 8:15 a.m. on a Monday. My home office in Austin was exactly as I'd left it on Friday, but the entire operating environment had changed. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching dust motes in the air, a beautiful detail I'd never had time to notice during a frantic morning stand-up meeting. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner and the distant groan of a garbage truck, the new soundtrack to a life that had previously run on a symphony of notifications and deadlines. I was sitting in my ergonomic chair, holding a warm coffee mug that smelled of a dark roast I'd finally had time to grind myself. My hand instinctively reached for the mouse to check my calendar, a motion repeated thousands of times over 2 decades. But my hand just hovered there, over the blank, dark screen. The system was waiting for an input, and for the first time in my adult life, I had absolutely none to give. That silence wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. It was the sound of a complex machine that had suddenly lost its primary data feed. For 24 years, the architecture of my days hadn't been my own. It was a structure built by project managers, product roadmaps, and the relentless cadence of a global tech company. My calendar was the blueprint. My email was the work order. Now the blueprint was blank and the orders had stopped coming. I sat there for what felt like an hour, just feeling the profound emptiness of it all. Then I did something I hadn't done on a weekday morning in my entire career. I didn't turn on the computer. I stood up, walked out of my office, and gently closed the door. I knew in that moment that I had just walked away from a meticulously designed structure, and if I wanted to have a life, I would have to build a new one from the ground up, beam by beam. The salary is the first thing you account for, but it's the shallowest part of your dependency on a career. High-performance jobs provide a vast suite of psychological benefits that are never listed on your W-2. Think of it as shadow compensation. My job gave me more than a paycheck. It provided a clearly defined mission, a team to lead, a ladder to climb, and a constant, predictable stream of complex problems that my brain was wired to solve. It gave me a reason to get on a plane, a reason to get out of bed, a reason to learn. This is the psychological paycheck, and when it stops getting deposited every Monday, the withdrawal symptoms are severe. You've spent years tracking your financial net worth, but have you ever run an inventory of this other, less obvious portfolio? I'm curious what your inventory looks like. Beyond the salary, what's the one psychological benefit your job gives you that you suspect would be the hardest to replace? Drop it in the comments below. Let's debug this together. For years, what do you do was the easiest question in the world to answer. I'm a systems architect was a perfect shorthand. It communicated competence, status, and a place in the world. It was a default user profile, preloaded with attributes that required no further explanation. The first time someone asked me that question at a neighborhood barbecue after I'd left my job, I completely fumbled. "I'm retired," I said, and the word felt like a conclusion, not an identity. It felt like saying, "I'm finished." The conversation stalled. The other person nodded politely and moved on, looking for someone who was still an active node in the network. That was the moment I truly understood. For 24 years, I optimized systems for a living. It took retiring to realize the most important system, my own identity, was running on legacy code from a job that no longer existed, and the user profile had just been wiped clean. This identity crash is compounded by another system failure, the rapid decay of your professional social network. I had lunch with two colleagues, Mark and Susan, nearly every week for a decade. We debated system designs over sandwiches and complained about reorgs over lukewarm coffee. I considered them close friends. After I left, the emails and texts became less frequent. It wasn't malice or neglect. It was simply a change in the operating environment. The shared context that fueled 90% of our conversations, the project deadlines, the office politics, the latest infuriating bug, was gone. Our friendship was a function of a shared professional instance, and when I logged out of that instance, the connection bandwidth dropped to near zero. You spend 40 hours a week with these people. You build a real camaraderie. But you have to be brutally honest with yourself. Is that bond built on genuine personal connection, or is it a byproduct of a shared mission that will evaporate when the mission ends? We're conditioned to see unstructured time as the ultimate luxury, the grand prize at the end of a career. The reality is that for a mind trained in execution and project management, total freedom is a terrifyingly inefficient state. I had this grand vision of my post-career days, a perfectly balanced portfolio of productive leisure, a little woodworking, a little reading, maybe learn a new programming language just for fun. Instead, I found myself paralyzed by choice. Without deadlines, every task felt both urgent and meaningless. Should I go to the gym now or in an hour? Should I work on the deck or read that history book? This wasn't freedom. It was the tyranny of unconstrained resources. In engineering, you learn that systems without constraints often perform poorly. They thrash, they get stuck in loops, they fail to allocate resources effectively. My brain, stripped of its external project management framework, had entered a state of low-grade, anxious paralysis. That paralysis was fed by a deeper issue, the complete failure of my internal feedback loop. A career in a field like technology is a fire hose of quantifiable metrics. You ship a product, you close a ticket, you hit a performance target, your code passes review, you get a promotion. There is a constant external validation stream that tells you that you are competent, that you are progressing, that you have value. My retirement plan had a number for my net worth. It didn't have a number for my self-worth. That was a significant oversight. For the first 6 months after I left, I had no metrics. Was it a successful day if I fixed a leaky faucet? Was it a failure if I spent the afternoon just reading a novel? My internal system for measuring progress was still calibrated to professional achievement, and in its absence, it kept returning a null value. I felt like I was running in place, making no impact on anything. My first attempt to solve this was to confuse hobbies with infrastructure. I went out and bought a garage full of woodworking tools. I was going to become a master craftsman. I joined a golf league. I was going to get my handicap down to a single digit. These were perfectly fine activities. They were enjoyable. They filled the time. But they were the equivalent of redecorating a house that was missing its foundation. Hobbies are the decorative pillows and the art on the walls. They make a life more pleasant, but they cannot support the load of your identity. They don't provide the core psychological pillars that a demanding career does: a sense of mission, a community of practice, a structured set of problems, and a feedback loop for mastery. You spend decades building a financial fortress for retirement. Don't forget to build a life to live in it. A list of hobbies is not a blueprint for that life. It's a shopping list. The turning point came about 8 months in, after another Tuesday morning spent aimlessly scrolling through news feeds and feeling that familiar low-grade dread. I realized I was waiting for a new identity to just arrive, like a software update pushed to my device. It doesn't work that way. I had to switch from being a passive user to an active developer. I had to design and build a new operating system for my life. The money problem is a math problem. The identity problem is an engineering one. You have to build the replacement. So I took one small, concrete step. I found a local environmental nonprofit whose website was a complete disaster. I offered to rebuild it for them, pro bono. It wasn't about the money. It was about having a client again. It was about having a problem to solve, a deadline to hit, and a tangible result to deliver. It was the first new load-bearing wall I built for my post-career life. That small project started a cascade of other deliberate design choices. I didn't find my passion. I prototyped a new life. I started defining success not by external metrics like title or the size of my team, but by internal ones: autonomy, mastery, and connection. My old definition of success was based on my impact on the system. My new definition is based on the system's impact on me. Am I learning something new? Am I in control of my own time? Am I building relationships that aren't dependent on a shared employer? People ask me if leaving my career was worth the struggle of that first year. The answer is unequivocally yes, but not because it's a permanent vacation. It was worth it because debugging my own identity and engineering a new one was the single most challenging and rewarding project I have ever completed. It was the final, most important system I ever had to build. So you see the pattern here, don't you? The phantom calendar, the shadow compensation, the default user profile, the decaying social network, the feedback loop failure. These aren't separate, isolated issues. They are all symptoms of a single catastrophic system failure. Your career isn't just a job, it's a fully integrated life support system. It provides the core architecture for your days, the primary validation for your worth, and the social context for your relationships. When you leave, you aren't just unplugging a single device. You are powering down the entire data center. My initial mistake was thinking I could patch this with hobbies. I was trying to run a few lightweight, decorative applications on a machine whose entire operating system had been wiped. It doesn't work. You can't just decorate the void. You have to recognize that the entire invisible infrastructure is gone, and no amount of woodworking or golf will rebuild it for you. I remember the exact moment this crystallized for me. It wasn't in my quiet office. It was 4 months in, sitting in my car in the parking lot of the H-E-B on Far West Boulevard on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd gone for groceries just to have a task to complete. I sat there for 20 minutes just watching people. People in scrubs on their lunch break, parents wrangling kids, contractors grabbing a drink. They were all nodes in a network, executing their daily scripts, their lives governed by a rhythm of purpose, however small. The Texas sun was beating down on the windshield, and all I could feel was a profound sense of being completely disconnected from the grid. I wasn't a part of the flow anymore. I was just an unassigned variable, sitting in a hot car in a parking lot, with a net worth of $1.7 million and absolutely no idea what to do with the next hour of my life. That silence was more terrifying than any system outage I had ever managed. And that's when I understood. We've been sold a bill of goods. We've been told that a successful career earns you a state of permanent rest. That's a lie. A successful career earns you the right to take on the single most important project of your life, the active, conscious construction of your own identity. For 24 years, I was a systems architect for other people's problems. It took retirement to understand that my final and most difficult assignment was to become the architect of my own. The money problem is a math problem. You can solve it with a spreadsheet. The identity problem is an engineering problem. You have to build the replacement. The freedom you spent decades earning isn't a destination. It's a design specification. It's a blank whiteboard. And the most terrifying and exhilarating moment is when you realize you are the one who has to pick up the marker. This is where you get to stop being a user and start being a developer. The scale of that project can feel paralyzing, I know. You're looking at a blank schematic and the task feels impossibly large. But you don't start by designing the entire system. You start by building one small functional module. Forget about finding your passion. That's a passive and useless frame. Instead, find a single concrete problem that you can solve. It could be a messy garage that needs a complete organizational system, a local campaign that needs a volunteer coordinator, or a small business run by a friend who needs help with their books. Give yourself a client. Give yourself a deadline. Give yourself a tangible deliverable. Create one single new feedback loop where you can see a direct line between your effort and a result. That's your new foundation. That is the first load-bearing wall of the life you are about to build. So I want to turn this over to the distributed intelligence of this community, especially those of you who have already deployed this patch in your own lives. For those of you who've already made the leap, what was the first brick you laid for your new identity? I'm not talking about a hobby or a trip to fill the time. I mean a piece of real load-bearing structure. What was that first pro bono project, that volunteer role, that small business you helped, or that community you joined that started to form a new foundation? Share your story in the comments. Your experience isn't just a comment, it's the blueprint for someone else who is staring at that blank whiteboard right now and needs to see where to start. If this project resonates, subscribing to the channel helps us keep building together. The spreadsheet gets you out the door. The real work starts the morning after.